It's the last of St. John's signs in his Gospel. St. John constructed his Gospel around 7 signs, which he, at the end of his Gospel, says to us quite clearly are supposed to bring us to faith. So at the end of his Gospel in chapter 20, at the end of that chapter, he says, Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So he constructs his gospel around 7 very carefully chosen signs. These are, in chapter 2, turning the water into wine. Chapter 4, healing a nobleman's son who was dying. Chapter 5, healing a man unable to walk. Chapter 6, feeding 5,000 people at once from a few bits of bread and fish. Chapter 6 again, walking on water. Chapter 9, healing a man born blind. And lastly, chapter 11, the raising of Lazarus. Now, in some cases, Jesus actually, or John constructs things so that Jesus teaches some message from those miracles. For instance, the feeding of the 5,000 is linked in St. John's Gospel with the saying of Jesus, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never hunger. He who comes to me will never thirst. So that is a distinct link between the event and the teaching that followed. Likewise, the healing of a blind man is associated in the Gospel with Jesus is saying, I am the light of the world. He who comes to me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, John was a very good teacher because some of the other signs, he doesn't actually put any teaching that's obvious alongside the sign. He leaves us to work it out for ourselves. All good teachers do that. They assume that if you give them the lead, youngsters or adults, whoever being taught, should have enough nous to sit down and think, oh, I wonder what that means. And actually, if you come to some conclusion, it probably means more to you than if you were told. However, each of these signs showed undoubtedly to the disciples that Jesus had a quite unusual power over the usual course of events, the usual way in which nature behaved. Jesus could somehow or other suspend the usual in order to produce the quite extraordinary thing in this case, which is even more extraordinary than elephants under paving slabs. The raising of Lazarus in itself is a climax, but it's one which prefigures the climax of the gospel. And of course, the climax of the gospel is the raising of Jesus himself from the grave. So this is a sort of mini-climax before the maxi-climax of the resurrection of Jesus. In the course of this story, which we haven't heard this morning, but in the course of this story, Jesus uses this miracle to illustrate perhaps his most staggering claim. But more of that later. The story, as you know, since it hasn't been read to you, the story, probably most of you know, starts at the beginning of chapter 11, and we read a bit towards the end of chapter 11. And Jesus, at the beginning of chapter 11, is in Jordan. He's over the River Jordan in what today is Jordan. And he's gone there for a bit of peace and quiet because he now has stirred up a great deal of opposition amongst the Jewish authorities. And he's gone there to pray, to teach his disciples probably. And he hears word that his great friend Lazarus is dying and is likely to die very quickly. That's what he hears. And the disciples assume, as we might assume, that Jesus would up sticks straight away and go straight off to Bethany, cross the Jordan, walk up into the hills round Jerusalem to Bethany, the village which is just outside Jerusalem. Lazarus was a member of a family that Jesus knew very well. His sisters, Martha and Mary, were well known to Jesus and occur once or twice or more times in the Gospels, and so it's a very well-known family. He was a good friend. You would expect Jesus to go straight away, but he didn't. He said to his disciples, I'm going to wait around for a bit, and they didn't know quite what to make of that, but he waited around for a couple of days, and then he set off, by which time, of course, Lazarus had died and had been buried, and he comes to the tomb, he meets the sisters. There's a conversation which I shall come to in a minute with the sisters, and then he comes to the tomb, and just before this reading there's the shortest verse in the Bible, which is Jesus wept, which everybody knows, St. John's Gospel, chapter 11, verse 35. Jesus wept. There are a number of questions which are quite interesting, and in my reading I've discovered that commentators have written many, many books, spent many, many hours trying to work out answers to these questions. The whole story raises three at least. One is, why did Jesus delay? Why didn't he go straight and heal Lazarus and stop him dying? Why did he wait deliberately so that Lazarus died? The second question, why did Jesus weep? He knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Why should he be weeping? And lastly, why did only John, record it? If it was such a very significant event, why did John record it? Well, most words are written about the last of those questions, and I'm not going to involve you in a long discussion and summary of all what different commentators say, but it all hangs around whether all the disciples were there at the time and so on and so forth. I think the question of why Jesus delayed and why Jesus wept are very closely related. If you read earlier in the chapter, you find Jesus says this: when he heard that Lazarus was so ill, he said, this sickness will not end in death. So he knew what was going to happen. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. I think that Jesus, working with his Father, knew that this was going to be the most significant miracle which Jesus would do, and that it would come down to us as the most significant miracle, and therefore Lazarus had to die. That's difficult, isn't it? And I think, and I may be totally wrong, you may have completely different ideas, I think that Jesus wept because he had done what he had to do, but in doing so he had caused such enormous sorrow to people he loved. Now, sometimes some of us feel like that, don't we? We feel that God has let us down. We feel that our prayers haven't been answered. But there is a purpose there. We may never know what it is, why our prayers haven't been answered, why we've had to wait for our prayers to be answered, why we have gone through so much sadness and sorrow. But Jesus wept. And that gives us a confidence that despite the fact that God is working his way through us, which may be painful for us, Jesus knows what that is like for us. Anyway, let's come to this most staggering statement. In the conversation with Martha, just outside the village, as Jesus is coming to the village, Martha hears of it, runs out, meets him under an olive tree somewhere, has a talk with him, and says, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." very cross probably, or very grieving. And Jesus says, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, sort of standard theological answer from Pharisees of the day, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, this is the statement, I am the resurrection and I am the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Just sit and think about that statement. It is astonishing. It is absolutely astonishing that somebody could claim that. Was Jesus crackers? Was he deluded? Was he crazy? Because this is the statement of a crazy person. Such a person should be in a lunatic asylum, in a padded cell to protect other people from him. But does the picture of Jesus that we read in the Bible add up to a crazy man? It's a question which you have to ask. If you come to the Gospels for the first time, if you are not a Christian, it is a question you have to ask. Is the picture you get of Jesus in the Gospels that of a crazy person? Is he mad? Or is he a liar? Is he a charlatan? Is he just saying these things and by some magic potion or other he works his miracles? Is that the sort of picture you get of Jesus in the Gospels when you read them? So is he bad? Is he mad? Is he bad? Or is he actually what he said he was? And the disciples who had been with him through all his life came to the conclusion that he was what he claimed to be, the Son of God, and on that basis they lived for him and some of them died for him. It is the most astonishing statement. It has something to say to us in the present. It says here that whoever lives and believes in me will never die. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. There is a sort of present and a future there. The present is that this life which will go on once we believe in Jesus is already here available for us. It is part of our human experience if we trust in Jesus. St. Paul puts it this way, because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. And Jesus himself said, I am come that they may have life, and they may have life to the full. Believing in Jesus now gives us a meaning, a purpose, a drive, forgiveness, grace, now. Not when we die, not just when we die, now. How important that is. This week we've read in the news and heard on the news of this tragic family, the Rousings. The father produced Tetra Paks, you know, these tetrahedral packs for milk and fluids, which pack so tightly, much better than bottles, and fill space almost entirely with the fluid. Brilliant invention. It brought him a huge fortune, which he passed on to his son. His son and his wife lived a life full of luxury, full of everything that anybody could ever want. But they experimented with drugs, they got hooked. The wife died of a drug overdose. The husband was so distraught he didn't know what to do. He put the wife in a cupboard, left her there for two months until she was discovered. And what a tragic story, a life of where somebody's got absolutely everything but no purpose, no meaning, nothing to give them any reason for living. Have you a reason for living? Look at our Olympians. Oh, what a wonder. Oh, Jessie Ennis. Well, yes, everybody falls in love with her, particularly the men, and all the others. They have worked their socks off. They have worked harder than any of us have ever worked in our lives in order to get where they've got. Got a gold medal. Ah, what now? Oh, we train for the next Olympics. 4 years' time. Huge effort. Another gold medal. Great. What now? Train for the next Olympics. Oh, bronze medal. Oh, I'm getting a bit too old. Retire. What? There's tremendous drive and purpose, but it's directed to an end which finishes and what is beyond. Yet Christians have a purpose which goes beyond every temporal purpose. Listen to what Paul says, talking of the first Olympic Games. Ever so up to date, everyone who competes, this is 1 Corinthians 9:25, everyone who competes in the Games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that does not last, but we do it for a crown that will last forever. Have you a meaning to your life beyond your immediate goals? And it says something to us about the future, doesn't it? I go to a number of funerals from time to time. I found as a headmaster that I had to go to many more funerals than I was expecting. Parents, sometimes, occasionally, sadly, pupils, but certainly parents, ex-members of staff, members of staff, their partners, and so on. I went to one only a fortnight ago, 3 weeks ago. There is this tendency now, and I applaud it, to take a funeral as a celebration of the life of the person. It's great, and why not wear bright clothes if that life has been a successful and a purposeful and a happy life. So let's celebrate it. Yeah, but that's past, isn't it? We have a future to celebrate. Not only a past. Yes, we can look back on the past of the life of the person who has died and say, yes, that's wonderful what God did through that person, or what that person was able to do. That's wonderful, what sort of a person they were. But we have a future, even then, to celebrate, not just the past. Let me just read that again. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection, and I am the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Well, we don't know much about what happens when we die. Various people have various ideas. I don't, for instance, buy the clouds and the harps picture or anything of that sort of. I just don't know. I'm completely agnostic on the matter, and frankly, it doesn't particularly interest me as something that I dwell on, though I might in a few years' time, I don't know. But it remains for most of us, as Hamlet very wisely said, it remains the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns. We don't really know what being with Jesus for the rest of eternity is going to actually mean for us. But we do have Jesus' assurance in John chapter 14. And where he says, in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. That he said to his disciples, and we take it, I think, legitimately to say to his disciples today, that sometime that there is a future for us. Now, at this stage, had it not been one of these short services, I was going to ask the technicians to play an extract from the Messiah, which is a most wonderful song But I think we need perhaps to continue with the service, finish, and then perhaps if you play it afterwards, and people, if they wish, can then sit and listen to "I know that my Redeemer lives. I know that my Redeemer lives. And at the last day he shall stand upon the earth." Let's pray.